Okay. Toby, I can see you. This must mean we're live.
Hey Darren, here we are live.
Here we are. Well, wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for Speakap's webinar today. Today, we're going to be covering enhancing productivity for frontline workers by starting with simplicity in communication. I am joined by the illustrious, always insightful Toby Anderson. Toby, why don't you say hello to our audience before we jump into some housekeeping?
Sure thing, Darren. So Tobi Anderson, the head of customer experience here at Speakup. I have the pleasure of working every day with our customers to both implement their new employee experience app and also to work with our existing customers to continue to push on achieving goals, getting the most ROI as possible from their investment. But really, it's about, using these technology tools to solve problems. And I get to work with amazing teams and communicators. So I love sharing their stories. I actually have a background. I have a master's in organizational and professional communication. And I'm pretty active in the International Association of Business Communicators. So I get pretty jazzed about talking about all this, and that's why I'm here today.
Fantastic. Well, everyone's envious that you get to actually use your education towards the subject that you're passionate about. So that's wonderful. Glad to have you here. And for everybody on the call, my name is Darren Jennings. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer here at Speakap. So I am accountable for all of our growth and overall company strategy. Spent about 12 years in the space. So that's a really long time. And I'm really excited to be here with Toby today to share some of these insights. We want to be really tactical today and make the best use of our time. Before we do, I want to cover a couple of housekeeping topics. Yes, we are recording this session. So if you're listening to this from the future, you already know that. But if you're listening to us live, thank you for joining us today. You don't need to take a ton of notes. Please feel free to do so. But we can share these slides with you or any of the reports that we cite throughout today's session. So we're on this on LinkedIn Live. We also want to keep this interactive. So if you can, send us a quick message in the chat. Just let us know who you are and where you're coming from, where you're joining us from today. And if you do want a copy of the slides, just comment slides in the chat, and we will make sure to reach out to you with a copy of those slides. So again, we're going to jump into this. Hello. Yes, I see a couple of people coming in. Thank you from the Netherlands. Yeah, so we're going to have a couple of feedback moments. So that's why I want to get everybody used to using the chat. But let's start with the agenda here today. So the very first thing we want to cover off today is the number one productivity blocker for frontline teams. As Speakap, we specialize in helping to improve employee experience for frontline workers. These are folks that don't sit in front of a desk all day. They are the people that are on site at your construction sites, in the manufacturing plants. They are assisting your guests if you're in hospitality or in retail. So they have a very limited amount of time, and we want to make sure that we are actually serving them with a great employee experience on a mobile device. So our emphasis is really on those frontline folks who are traditionally the hardest to get in touch with. So we want to help you all by identifying that number one productivity blocker. Next, we're going to jump into some additional problems that hurt productivity and from a communications perspective. Once we get all of that catharsis out of the way and we've identified all of these challenges we deal with, we're going to give you some really tactical advice on how to break that cycle and solve some of these challenges. Then we'll wrap it up and give some key takeaways. So rock and roll. Let's do it. Toby, before we do, Toby, why is everybody here today? What is the point of all of this?
Yeah, why spend this time? It's a great point. So, internal communicators don't just share information. We know this. And by the way, hi Andy. Thanks for joining. We work with a lot of different folks who are in charge of communications every day, from being in an internal comms team, working on employee experience, to being in the HR team, possibly marketing, potentially IT, maybe even an operational group. And I know that when we say simplicity in comms is a big answer to productivity, it's like, sure, that sounds simple, but we know that it's not necessarily simple. We know that actually what you're doing is connecting people to the information, the tools, the other people that they need to really work better and be successful. And putting together a framework and a process and an approach to do that's not necessarily simple, but it is something that could be done with an eye towards simplicity in the employee experience. And when you do that, you actually can impact your productivity. And when we do that, we as internal communicators or those responsible for this are ultimately helping to prove and show our value in our organization. So it's something that really does matter for all of us. And so that's why we really wanted to pick this topic today. So thanks for joining us. I see we have Caitlin and Brian. So thanks all for coming in. All right, let's move into what is next, right? So from a productivity blocker perspective, what is that number one productivity blocker? I have to say, we have our take, right? And that is why we're here, and we have a strong opinion about it. But I would love to actually, look to you all and anybody who is willing, again, pop it into the chat. But what do you think the number one productivity blocker is for frontline teams? There's a few things it can be for sure. So please think about sharing as we give you some time and space to think and do that. We're going to hit on a few things that impact this. And so I will hand this on over back to Darren.
Yeah, sure. Tobi, I love the emphasis on solving business problems. And I'm also really interested in hearing what the audience has to say about their number one blocker. I think there's going to be some baggage here that we're going to uncover, which I love to see. All right. So look, we talk about this a lot within the industry that, when someone starts a new job or if they've been there for a long time, nobody joins an organization because they want to be a mediocre performer, do the bare minimum. They really, the fact is that people just want to come in and us to get out of the way and let them do their work. Yes, they want to be onboarded and mentored and coached, and they want to have the tool and resources to do their job well. But what they don't want to do is have to rummage through a lot of different applications or a lot of noise that are out there. I know I'm giving some stuff away, but let's really think about this. I mean, and you consider the fact that according to the survey, that 86% of employees believe that ineffective communication is a significant underlying reason for a lack of productivity in the workplace. I mean, that is a major problem. And this continues to be a problem. And, I was preparing for this presentation, Tobi, and I came across another stat that I didn't have time to put into the presentation today, but something around the lines of 45% of executives or leaders don't think there's anything wrong with their communications at all. Everything's fine. So if you have, let's be honest, almost all of employees think, yeah, this is a problem. And not quite half of executives think that this is a problem. We've got a problem just in that. So, I really want to make sure that we can solve this challenge through improving communication to improve productivity. So we can just get out of the way and let people do the great work that they joined for in the first place.
Yeah, that stat's so interesting. And it backs up what I hear a lot from working with different folks. And that is that, from a leader's perspective, who's maybe using email and maybe messaging tools, they are seeing their folks every day. They think they know what their frontline teams want and need. And then the data shows that when you hear from your frontline teams, it's not always the same thing. But I see Ken is here. Awesome. Great to see you. And I would say Ken would be an exception to that because I've worked with him. But willingness to be open and read them in the app, being engaged often enough to stay up to date. Getting them there, making sure what's the why messaging and why should they bother? 100% is a factor we've seen too. Thanks for sharing that, Ken. All right, let's see what we've got next here.
Yeah, this goes beyond, again, establishing the problem here, Tobi. I mean, the cost of ineffective communication, according to Axios HQ, is $2 trillion annually in lost productivity in the U.S. alone. 2 trillion with a T, which
mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling. I mean, it is a mind-boggling amount of money. So it's really not just hitting employee morale. And we talk about these things as communicators, as people that work in employee engagement, that our jobs here is to create greater alignment, greater strategy alignment, greater clarity, greater connections amongst teams and peers. But there is an actual business impact on the bottom line. And these eye-watering numbers that you see, this is not an accident. This actually happens. And so we're going to solve some of those today. Why don't you maybe go one more forward, because I'm going to dig into that a little bit more too. So we see that underneath that $2 trillion scary figure, this is what it can actually lead to. We're talking about a 44% increase in failure to complete projects, a 31% increase in low employee morale, 25% of missed performance goals, 18% lower sales, 55% of the people have missed messages. They don't know what's going on. We're increasing burnout, stress, fatigue. We're also making it hard to find that content. So we're missing files. And this is impacting our customer experiences because, of course, if our employees don't know what's going on, they're not able to serve our customers. And of course, we see this a lot, an increase in turnover. And this, of course, is a combination of all of these things. So turnover, 12% lost employees. These are pretty significant impacts that we see. So how do we simplify that, Tobi?
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to do our big reveal here in a second about the number one productivity blocker that we see. I am wondering if anybody else is going to post one. Ken is like our gold star winner for sharing his thought.
That's right. It's a safe space, everybody.
Before I do the big reveal, I just wanted to give one more minute. Okay, we're just going to go for it. Let's just share. Here's our take, right? So at the end of the day, one of the biggest things we see is blasting the same messaging across multiple channels, regardless of who you're trying to reach. So ultimately, this is the blast it, the fire hose. Look, as a communication professional, it is not realistic to think you can have like one channel for everybody. That's not realistic. We do need to hit people and meet them where they are and have different channels. And there's something to be said about frequency and repetition. We know that's true. Unfortunately, when all messages go that way, we lose people. It's just noise. And to what Ken was speaking to, it can absolutely make people tune out, right? So maybe they try it and they're not getting relevant information to them. And ultimately, there are things that we could do here. So I think one of the themes I see when I meet a new customer is that they're using bulletin boards. They're using still email, even though a lot of times the frontline teams don't even have email in the system. Maybe we don't have a phone number or an updated one. But SMS text messaging, digital screens, messages to managers, still cascading comms, of course. The time clock, posts, direct mailers, right? We try to reach our frontline teams. It's not for lack of trying. So one of the things that I often start with when we do our strategy sessions with the customer is to think about, okay, you came to Speak Up because we obviously have an employee experience app because you are still trying to do a better job with that experience and communicating with and engaging your frontline teams. So don't forget to then stop and think about, what are you going to do differently? How are you going to not just add this channel and continue to blast, but rather reassess what goes where and when? So that is absolutely what we see as an approach here. So let's dive in and talk about first, what are the problems that we tend to see that are kind of contributing to this productivity blocking? Simply put, too many channels is really the opposite of simple. I do have some customers that do a great job with this and really look at it. But a lot of them do fall victim also to the, just one more thing. Let's try one more thing. So ultimately, when you have these multiple channels, we're asking our employees to find things in too many places. Things are getting diluted. Messages are getting missed. So that is absolutely something that is common across our customers. Would love for another audience participation here for popping into the chat if you would. How many communications channels does your team currently manage? Would love to see just a number, even if it's a range, right? 3 to 5, 6 to 10, 15. I hope not for your sakes. And let's not forget external messaging, right? Like we also have a lot of our folks who are doing internal and external communications. There has been a lot done recently where we realize there's a lot of crossover between, and that messaging about what's going on inside your company can be tremendously powerful externally as well for employee branding and retention and celebrating people. So that's another whole set of channels to think about. 7 channels, 6 to 10. This is pretty common, yeah, with what I'm seeing. Absolutely. Thanks, guys. 2-star participation awards going out. All right. So with that said, let's just talk about some additional, trends that we tend to see. 10 plus, and that's brutal. So when you have no differentiation when you have your internal audiences. So it's the all company email, the blast to all. Asking employees to sign into maybe 8 different apps or websites every single day to do their work, to be an employee, get self-service to things they need. Sending the same message, the exact same message in email, in text, in Teams, and on WhatsApp in hopes that you catch people. This is another common one that we see. Yeah, and that mentions working in hospitality, email, WhatsApp, Facebook, were just some of the ones that went out. Routing these comms through a central team. So think leadership comms, think wider messaging, not enabling those leaders to share those themselves, creating a bottleneck. We do have some under-resourced folks who have to manage these things. And when everything has to go through that group, it can be a real issue to getting information out there. Another theme is, taking the time to actually teach people how to get the information that they need. So it's one thing to start a company and you kind of get onboarded, but do we take the time to explain, here's the tools, here's how and when and where to access them? It's definitely worth doing. Ultimately, we also see, now look, we had a lot of folks sign up for this webinar who are comms professionals. So I'm not trying to preach to the choir here, but sometimes we do get in a trap of forgetting some of our fundamentals. And so a common one we see is still sending out a lengthy newsletter, email updates to that whole company. Like, these are the things that we've been doing for a long time, and we ought to think about stopping. Now, I know I'm not trying to offend anybody. Darren and I talked about this, right? Like, this could be a sensitive thing. But indeed, a frontline worker is not going to spend the time. We just don't have the attention span. People show up, they want to get their work done. They're not going to read long form comps. So ultimately, we're challenging you to think about, am I producing content and sharing information that is really being consumed in the format and the way that it is today? So we're going to talk about that a little bit.
I think that's such an important topic, Tobi, because yes, we did indeed have a discussion. We don't want to offend the audience, but you know what? If we're asking our employees themselves to have a degree of change management, that to get uncomfortable to try something new, I think it's important that we challenge ourselves as well. And I get it. I know you spend a lot of time writing this, curating it, getting the formatting, getting the language right, and nobody wants to think their baby is ugly. We're not saying the content itself isn't valuable. It's just the packaging. It's time to rethink that. Let's break that down. And Tobi, I know you'll go into a great amount of detail here, but yeah. Newsletters, and into it.
This one's one of your favorite topics, Darren. I'll let you hit this one.
It is. I mean, look, corporate jargon, of course. I mean, as my daughter would say, it's all so cringe. I mean, thankfully, I think we've seen a lot from the industry in general, moving away from a lot of this corporate jargon. We still see it, where people are just using these business terms because, I don't know, they think it makes them sound smart to their executives or to make you sound good to your investors. But talk to people like people. If we're using jargon like this, please, especially when you think about your frontline audiences, where they're accessing it from a device that's just a few inches wide, it's in their hand. They're not going to really comprehend the full scale of what you're actually trying to say, because we're not making it easy for them. While I'm on my my soapbox here, Tobi, I will say that if you're also considering having a corporate acronym library, this is something else that we still consider seeing. Maybe think differently about that. I know it's hard to dislodge some of those things if those acronyms have been in place for a long time, but if you need a glossary of terms just for people to understand what you're talking about as a business, maybe it's time to think a little bit differently. Think about humanizing it a little bit more.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think we have some customers who have engineering teams. They have very focused, detailed groups who need those specific technical languages, and we acknowledge that, right? But when you're doing wider business communication, do we really need to teach everybody? I don't know. So it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, this is another one for me. And we hear this a lot about not letting employees participate in discussions. This happens a lot today. And look, there are some organizations that really have cultures that are open and transparent, and they want to have that feedback, that two-way comms. A lot of organizations, especially when they're just starting with this, with an audience with whom they've never communicated or ever had that feedback, there's a lot of worry and wringing of hands about the risk involved. And I really do understand it. We can talk about some of the tactics that we can employ a little bit later on, but I would really strongly encourage folks, don't make it bigger than it is. I mean, you really are missing some valuable insights. I mean, think about the persona of the people that are actually dealing with your customers every single day. They're the ones that are doing the work that you ask them to do. They're executing on the strategy that your organization is putting in place. They have a lot of really great things to say, and people love to have their voices heard. And I think that's a really important point. Let's unlock the power of that collective knowledge. And then let's tell our employees implicitly, we value your feedback. Because if you don't do that, a lot of these things really do hurt productivity, because people feel like, well, if the company's going to tune me out, why should I tune them in? So,
and employees notice. They notice when they don't have a voice. It's really obvious. So I think this one can't be underscored enough. Yeah. All right, breaking the cycle.
how do we do it, Tobi?
How do we do it? Well, let's talk about some of the impact factors again before we dive into. I've got a lot of little ideas for you, and actually some aren't that little, but
yeah, we're going to fix this. I mean, the point that we're talking about is, I think we're identifying a lot of problems that the folks that are on the call or listening to us are aware of. But the reality is that we as business communicators are actually solving business problems. And when you consider the fact that employees who do feel more included in workplace communication are 5 times more likely to report increase in their own productivity, this according to McKinsey, and that's a pretty powerful stat. When you think about the fact that, again, employees are already reporting that they don't feel like they have a lot of really good communication that's standing in the way of their productivity, that the leadership don't necessarily feel that it's that big of a problem. But when you do unlock that, just look at the results. I mean, 5 times more increase in productivity as reported by the employees themselves. That's why we care about this.
Yeah, that's the powerful stuff right there. All right, so let's talk about some real specifics. And I try very hard not to get off on a tangent. So Darren, you're going to help me if I start going.
All right.
As I get a little excited talking about these things. All right, so what do we do? So we think that, and it's probably been very clear, we think you should really consider reducing channels as possible. We know that you can't just have one channel, but reduce them if you can, and target your comms. It does take a little bit of planning. You can put a framework in place, but making sure you're providing relevant comms to the right people at the right time. And we say the little asterisk of, even if it's hard at first, because you would be making a change, and any behavior change can be hard. We know there's some people who are pretty open to change, and there's a lot of people who aren't. So, there's some tactics to be taken here. So, what does that look like? How do we get into this? Let's dive into some real specifics. Take that time to understand your audience. So, I have some customers who are finishing up internal comms audits right now. They are taking a look at how their comms are working today. It's an effort. I will admit that's a bit of work to do. There's many approaches to this though. So you do need to know some key things. Who are those key audiences? What do they care about? So for example, we're not saying it has to be a huge number either, right? You do have the everyone. You have messages that need to go to everyone. Very important things going on. You need to know what they care about. What are their priorities? So let's say you're talking about leadership. Maybe you're talking about people managers. Perhaps you're talking about your new hires. Actually, we know that if you do a good job in that first 90 days with new hires, your retention goes up. We also know if you give them a bad experience, your retention will go down, which is the opposite of what we're looking for. So those are just a few examples of what those audience segments might look like. But ultimately, the other part is, how do we get to folks? Because they are coming to work wanting to get their work done. And Ken brought it up in the beginning, like, how do we get people to integrate something like an app into their work? How do we get them to look at a digital screen or whatever the channel is? So I think really looking into these things and not assuming you might actually want to survey. Surveys can be tough when you're talking about folks without email and that kind of thing. So can you get in front of a team at stand-up meetings? Can you get into a leader meeting that's existing and join an agenda and talk to folks? Can you do some focus groups? stakeholder interviews. I mean, there's a lot of tactics and a lot of, approaches to this, but it is indeed worth taking the time to understand those. If nothing else, take your stab at what you believe it is, and then vet it through some people as well. I do have another company, so they're not going as far as doing a full comms audit, but I have some companies who are doing a good job of popping in, for example, in their app, a poll, just a pulse type of poll, asking, for example, hey, what type of comms do you want to see here? And then giving multiple choice. So it's very easy and quick for people to react. But then there's a last one that says other, comment below, right? And then you have an open feedback mechanism. You can hit people quickly and start to get to those folks who maybe are hard to get to in a survey. So ultimately, we know now who our audiences are. We know what they care about. At the end of the day, what tools are we asking them to use? We talked about that. We know, look, we know there's no one super tool out there that meets everybody's needs and solutions. So just by nature of getting business done, enabling our workers to do things like self-serve their PTO information, that's really important to do. So how do we take the time to ensure that we know what they need, look at their journey and their experience, and potentially consolidate, make these things very easy to access from one place so that they don't have to try to remember the website or the phone number for getting tech help, for example, right? Darren, I know you have some strong opinions about this one too. Do you want to add any other notes?
Well, I do have some strong opinions, and it's actually related to the first topic you talked about around, well, both of the ones you talked about previously, about understanding your audience and the change management that we want to go through. Bringing on a new tool to communicate or to have a better employee experience, yes, it's difficult and challenging. And we see a lot of organizations that want to have this gradual move, and that we support. I think that makes a lot of sense. But there's this underlying fear that we sometimes hear where we don't want to actually get rid of another channel of communication platform, even though it's going to be subpar compared to what we want to go with. Text messaging is a very common one that we see in the industry a lot. We have a text message solution that we use. We use it sparingly. We send it out ever so often, but we're not giving our folks an incentive to actually go onto the new platform that they're using, because we're also diluting our messages with this other channel. So I think it's part of that. Hey, it might be a little bit difficult in the early days, but you're ultimately going to be hurting yourself in the future by having it not be simple for your folks, not be simple for you. And then you're going to continue to see that fragmentation of your communications channels and not giving people an incentive to actually go through and try something new. So yes, there's a lot of tools that are out there. People need to access their shifts. They need to access their payroll. They need to do all sorts of HR things. What we want to do is help our organizations, our customers, find that first stop destination for all of their communications and employee experience needs. So if you have a question, or if you need to get in touch with somebody, or if you need to do anything that you need to do as part of an employee, the very first place you should start is your Speakap app.
Yeah, and I have a couple of customers who really, one comes to mind. So there's things like linking. I think I don't have any customers who don't do some basic linking. One of the most common things is, here's where you get to your benefits info when it comes time for open enrollment, right? Making that really easy to get through your comms. But I have a hospitality company who is really they don't provide email to their frontline teams. They really push the app, but they have integrated key tasks into the app itself so that when I need to order a uniform, when I need to put in a maintenance request, truly easy to get done, very easy to get a task done in the app. But I'm also at the same minute, if there's a news post, I'm going to catch that in that 60 seconds I spent in the app. So that's pretty cool. And then we have a really large logistics company that we're doing some real deep integration work with. And that is pretty exciting to me. And we're seeing more and more of this where they have an HR tool that is pretty extensive. It actually has its own app, but it's good at, a few things. It's not very good at, it's hard to get into. It's not very good at sharing communications, right? So they've made a conscious decision to use their employee app as the thing they ask people to get into. And then we're taking people through an integration and actually just exposing key things like their schedule and even tactical things like being able to shift bid or swap shifts with other people. super valuable for somebody who just tactically, they're trying to get their work done, but hey, they need a shift covered on Saturday. I'm in the app, and guess what? I'm also going to see that I have a task assigned that I need to get done. So, these are some of the specific things that we're seeing that really work. Also, exclusive comms, and I say most of the time, because again, I acknowledge repetition in communication can matter, right? Like there's a reason why you hear the same jingle in the commercial, right? You try to get people familiar with something. But when you do that, and you're sharing these comms, so Darren gave the example. We have a customer who is really trying to transition people from text messaging to their app. Not everybody's on the app. So there's this crutch situation going on. And so you send a lot of messages through the SMS tool, but you're also sending them on the app. Well, what's the incentive to change? And so our advice is consider indeed use the existing tool, but for crisis comms, for really important things like open enrollment. Maybe you actually will send something to multiple channels. You really need to hit people wherever you can. But then have your celebration messaging only go exclusively through the app, for example. You have your nice to know content that is really important. A lot of the cultural stuff, celebrating teammates, that kind of thing. And these things can absolutely live in one place. We have a new customer who's been using email for a lot of those things, and they're thrilled at the idea of starting to put those things in the app that somebody will see when they log in. And yet when they get a news push, they're going to see that right as a push notification to their phone, for example. So it's really starting to, again, target those messages, not only to the audience, but also, frequency and that formula of where do I get that information. So some other really cool examples of this exclusive comms, and for Ken's note initially about how do I get people to use the app, this one comes to mind. I've got actually like 3 different customers doing this right now, which is employee events. Still put up a poster, get people excited about it, but guess what? It's pointing with a QR code directly to the event in the app. And that is where you RSVP. So in order to participate, they get the information, they build excitement, but they know that's the spot to go for the event information. Then when they've RSVP'd within their app, for example, they're going to get a reminder. That's also where they're going to get the pictures of what the event looked like after the fact, right? So it's just moving those channels. So that's not technically an exclusive comm, but it's really taking advantage of that piece of it, that RSVP. It's only happening in one place. So ultimately, I think there's more examples, but I want to make sure we're conscientious of time. I'll just mention one more. Those newsletters. We've mentioned the newsletters. I know that a lot of people are still doing newsletters, and there are some people who love a newsletter. Frankly, I think it's maybe like a 25% maybe who will spend the time. And so that's not that it's a bad thing, but the problem with the newsletter is the production time, the time to get it out, the time to get it right. By the way, it's usually available in one language. So when you have something like that, what I've seen a lot of folks doing is taking something that exists. So, as we talked about, you're implementing a new channel, so you have this existing newsletter, starting to migrate that, right? So taking the information, but when it's available in real time, one of those is shared out, for example, as opposed to an employee app. And then you're just transitioning over time. And maybe for a while, the newsletter still happens, but it's just pointing people into that source of where the full story lives. And that way you're getting people used to, hey, this is the place where I can get it. And I don't have to wait for once a month or once a quarter. I can actually just be getting my real-time information as it happens. So one more example for you. All right. This one's fun. I really got this from one of my customers I'm working with right now. They're a UK entertainment company. Such a fun group of internal communicators. And this is a real focus. So they are very interested in fairness, equity, diversity. And so they're really putting a thoughtful effort in democratizing communication within their organization. Of course, they still have the comms team handling company-wide messaging. I'm not saying that they don't, but what this is to say, a team of communicators can only do so much, right? Realistically. And so this is enabling specific leaders to get out messages that they need to, potentially to their own region, their own job function. This can be done in a really planned way, a permissioned way. It's not just opening the floodgates necessarily, but it's really just setting up that framework to say, hey, there's some folks that we should just let go and do their thing. And if there are issues, or if they need help, we can work on that. So it's sort of that exponentially building out the power of your comms team by supporting other leaders and enabling them to do what they need to do.
I love this one. It's one of my favorite topics too, Tobi, just because there's a certain degree of credibility, I think, that comes with it, and a trust when you see somebody on a regular basis and they're the ones that are sending the comms. It also sends a subtle message that, well, if they're there, maybe I should be there too.
100%, 100%. I have a number of customers who are, at a really good point in their, overall, what I would call activation when it comes to an app. In other words, who's participating, who's on board. And 9 times out of 10, when there's a gap at the end, it's because they have certain leaders who are not participating.
Right.
And so a linchpin is to focus on those leaders rather than the mass, because when you get those leaders, then it starts setting that example and getting other people in there too. So usually it's about like a conversation, right? Like, what are your challenges? What are you having struggles with? Or what questions do you get asked over and over? And working with those leaders to show them how this approach and this enablement for communicating could help make their lives and their work easier as well.
Yeah, love it. Just a quick time check, Tobi. We got about 9 minutes left. We got a few more things to get through.
I told you I can go on and on. All right. So implementing using change management. So ultimately, our staff are, going to know what they know. And so if you take some of these examples that we've given you, democratize comms, reduce your channels, you're going to be implementing a change. So think about some of those fundamental tools, like making sure people are aware of what's going on, enabling them with some training, help materials, reinforce the change, speaking to leaders, finding out how it's going, right? Getting that feedback. We're implementing this. How's it being received? Change, learn and adapt. And then ultimately, we do have an opportunity when you have new hires to get them started on the right foot. So don't underestimate that opportunity, because, when you have new processes for communicating, new places, et cetera, those are the starting points that you could really kick people off in the right direction without as much effort.
Totally. A lot with high turnover industries too, don't you? If you're turning over more than 100% of your work, we see in industries like retail and hospitality, that's, you're refreshing your employment pool every time. So it's a great opportunity.
Yeah. One quick example. So meeting people where they are is something I've talked about. So when you are, for example, trying to get new people in to use an app, or the folks, as Ken talked about, are just not participating, there's other ways to get to people. So QR codes, maybe their phone number changes all the time. Maybe their email changes. We can't get that done. So you could create ways to get people in using easy activation methods, understanding what are concerns from people. So that's part of that change management loop, is back to what does your audience need? What do they care about? What are their concerns? And we have some customers who are even working with us to optimize to the time of day that we sync their data based on when they're going to have their first onboarding session, right? Really making sure that their experience is as good as we can make it. And those are, we have a large US hospitality company working on that with us right now. So that's really a lot of fun. Okay. Here we go. Next one. So getting back to basics for your content creation, we talked about these fundamentals. Ultimately, we do need to think about what we sound like. There's the audience to be considered. Maybe you are speaking to your investors, and that's one set of language. And then when you're just trying to get folks aware of the latest open enrollment opportunities, you can think differently. Think about language, right? Think about the language that your audience speaks, and make sure there are actual translation capabilities, ways to be sure that they are understanding it. Look at things like including multimedia videos, use things like closed captioning for language, using things like color and themes to help people associate types of messaging. So there's a lot of, again, fundamentals here, but our data shows we're only capturing these people for a short time in their sessions. And so we need to keep that in mind when we're creating our communications. All right, last one. Those employee voices. So this is something that Darren and I are both really passionate about. I will share one example that I just love talking about this one, but this was is a construction, and it's a company that's distributed across several states. There's a lot of concern when they launched about who's going to say what. And it was exciting that they decided to do this because it was very new for their industry. So they had it really locked down, their app, and they weren't quite seeing the participation that they wanted over time, right? And they were concerned with that, but it's like, but you didn't enable much participation. So, they actually made a pretty big decision and just opened it all up. Then they had to do some change management and make sure everybody knew they could, right? And they've definitely seen a lot more participation, a lot more leaders participating and sharing and finding that value as well. So that's an example of going big. So you can start small, and they did. This group, they did start with like having a few key leaders be able to post, but they went pretty quickly to the other end of the spectrum. The point is, you can do what's right for you. So we have customers who allow posting only by certain job roles. And there's no comments, for example. They just don't want to enable that two-way feedback, but they have the ability to react. So you can have some type of ability to see engagement. Making it super clear when people start of what this thing's for, what is okay and what's not. Just setting the tone can go a long way. And then, go even further and take the stab at creating spaces for people to share honest feedback. That takes some work. It takes work for them to know it really is safe. Letting people post things and maybe that are controversial, but then answer those questions. So those are some of the things to think about as well. Wrapping up, Darren, you want to help us wrap?
Yeah, that was great, Tobi. I mean, a lot of detail there. I love all the customer examples. Thank you so much for that. So let me just go one more on the wrap up. So I guess the overall question is, how do noisy, repetitive columns block productivity? Again, I'll come back to what I said at the top of the hour. It's just getting in the way of people getting their work done. We are here to facilitate and enable our employees to do the best possible work and to be their authentic selves. But we don't want to make those work environments more complicated. We don't want to make it hard for them to know, where do I go to get this information? Or I think somebody texted me about this a few months ago. Maybe I should check the bulletin board, or maybe I should go ask my manager, or maybe they sent an email to my personal email. It slows them down, not to mention the people on this call that are having to manage all of these channels. Let's simplify. Don't get in the way of people doing good work. Let's just enable them to make it better. So I think we got a couple of key takeaways here, Tob.
Absolutely. So ultimately it's the why statement, right? So if we can do this, if we can take a little time, relook at our frameworks, evaluate what we're doing, we can prevent that wasted time for people to try to just get their work done. And again, people want to just do their job and do it well. Making sure that there's equity, that people understand what's available. I can't believe how many people I talk to where their benefits programs are just not being taken advantage of at the scale that's available. Given that employee voice, I know we've talked about it. We do have a lot of customers creating enterprise or employee resource group spaces where people can actually, get together on a topic or interest groups as well. And then when we do this, we do see an impact on employee engagement, and we know that does increase productivity, as hard as it is to achieve. So with that, I'm just reiterating. So reduce those channels, target your comms. Understand who you're talking to and make sure that you're speaking to them. Making sure we have one place to access our tools whenever possible. Exclusive comms most of the time. Democratizing those communications, so enabling other people to share. Don't forget that change management piece. Back to basics for creating content, and welcome those employee voices.
Love that. Thank you, Tobi. It was really, really enlightening. I'm going to use this as a quick plug for our upcoming webinar. And this is one that I'm going to be doing with our good partners at EduMe with Bradley Hunt. We're going to be talking about the ROI of effective frontline employee training. A lot of good nuggets in here as well, and some really good use cases that we can share. So you should have a QR code on your screen if you're interested in joining for that. Of course, there is an intersection of communications and training to enable great work. So we are really passionate about this topic as well. So scan that QR code, smash that register button, join us on July 18th. We'd love to see you there for that one. And I think we are about out of time here, Tobi. So I will just reiterate, if you have questions, send me a DM. You can also comment against this event, even if you have to go right now. But get in touch with us. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Tobi, I bet you'd be willing to connect with us.
Absolutely. Always.
And of course, you can get to us through any of the reliable channels. If you just go to the next one there, Tobi.
Yep.
You can always get in touch with us at speakap.com. But thank you so much for attending. For those of you that are listening, thank you for sticking it out with us. Really appreciate your time. And Tobi, great work, great insights.
Yeah. Same back at you. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, everybody, for attending.
Thanks, everybody.